an argument against Zeno in Philosophical Absurdity. Let's talk about Zeno and Postmodernist. These two schools of thought have a few threads in common. One, they both find flaw with Western logic, science, and philosophy. Second, they both find fault with the limits of human language and sense perception. Zeno lived from 430 to 490 BC, at the birth of Western thought. And the postmodernist movement began with the rise of Heidegger and Derrida. And they, the postmodernists, think that they are witnessing the death of Western civilization. And from that perspective, you could almost call this current digital age of postmodernism an age of posthumanism, and that their generation will bring about the death of existentialism and modernity. But I don't think so. See, both Zeno and the postmodernist are looking at the same problem from different points in time. The beginning of and the end of the patriarchal normative right. And to this problem they say no, and reject the claim that Western capitalist democratic thought holds any objective truth. Both Zeno and the postmodernist are sticking out a tongue and pointing, saying that there are no universal truths, no objective truths, and that there is only relative truth and subjective facts and consensus. Zeno and postmodernists are essentially trying to do the same thing, to undermine modernity, what we consider progress, at its foundation. The one place that Zeno and postmodernists disagree, and what my argument cannot reconcile, is pluralism. Yet even so, to me, Zeno is a proto-postmodernist. What I say today is an argument against socialistic postmodernism and an argument for logic, reason, and science. And though I will take jabs at both to prove my point, this is not an argument against atheism nor feminism, for both of these ideas and movements can be based on reason and logic and can have a moral and righteous goal. It is when these movements hit postmodernism that the mix becomes toxic and skepticism gets turned on those who would wield it. Let's compare Zeno and postmodernists for a moment. Zeno defended oneness and argued against logic, logos, mathematics, and science, while postmodernists protest for extreme pluralism and relative subjectivism. They promote narrative facts, magical thinking, and equality of outcome. Zeno was arguing against the foundations of Western and modern thought. His targets of ridicule were Pythagoras and Socrates, while his most vocal opponent was Aristotle. Current postmodernists are arguing against the consequences of democracy, capitalism, and Western philosophy. They care more about emotions and feelings than they do about logic and reason. But now you might be asking, who was Zeno of Elea? Zeno was a pupil of Parmenides. It was Parmenides who defined the concept of the one, which Zeno famously defended. Zeno's paradoxes were designed to disprove or at least show the flaws in the popular ideas of his day, those of plurality and change. His arguments were on the flaws of perception and against the concepts of plurality, motion, and space. He argued for the idea that being is one seamless, unchanging whole, that reality is an illusion, that real change is impossible. The lesson that one should learn from Zeno's paradoxes should not be that the institutions of reality are flawed, and so that they must be dismantled, but that there are discrepancies between philosophical theory and lived reality. To my mind, Zeno knew his paradoxes were absurd, and that their implications were ridiculous. To me, at the end of the day, his arguments were merely intellectual exercises. You can see this by the claim that he was two-tongued, and that he would regularly argue both sides of a paradox. This reaction to the limitations and failures of Western civilization and thought can be seen as the internal thoughts of a teenage student when they first come to realizations about the world and reality which contradict themselves. First, they are disgusted, realizing that their air is being rebreathed by the whole classroom, and that they have to inhale the same breath from a classmate that they hate. Then comes doubt. They find out about particles, cells, and atoms. For what can be both solid and whole, yet porous and filled with empty space at the same time? They ask, how can this be normal? Next is fear. They find out that photons can pass through walls, that they are not safe from radiation, that their mothers and fathers cannot protect them, that their very walls are illusions. Soon they feel anger, for the problem is worse than their parental figures, those pillars of strength being weak, worse than their teachers and religious leaders, their authority figures being flawed. No, they find out that the very language they speak was made up, and possibly by people who they disagree with. The words that they have to use to communicate with other humans are flawed and incomplete. And finally, they've had enough, and they reject the entire institution. Here, that institution is education, but you can switch in and out any that you like. Religion, science, history, military, political, heck, civilization itself. That the rules are made up by consensus blows their minds and destroys their reality. It is the same way many baby atheists leave religion, because either their basic understanding of religion cannot handle the complexities and paradoxes, what they would call hypocrisies and contradictions in adult faith, or because they never truly believed in the first place. When their faith was tested, their doubts got the better of them. For there are stronger arguments against faith than the reactionary spite of an immature mind. It is when I was a deconstructionist and one of my best friends from high school said to me, but if we can break the speed limit, then how is it really a law? In the end, it is the same old argument between deist and atheist. If nothing can be destroyed, then how is it that we living people see things constantly and consistently end? To a modern person, this would be a matter of science and perception. But to those of us with faith, this supposed paradox never phases us. But there was another group silently listening to our argument. The postmodernists. And to them, the argument itself was a sign of failure. The pain and suffering that such an argument caused could not be allowed. They cried out, if they are arguing about what happens after we die, then we must stop death. While we were arguing about the existence of a soul or a God, the postmodernists were off creating their own language, and with it their own new gods and idols. And it is language where they got us. For we could never admit to each other or to ourselves that what you call energy we have always called the soul, chi, or kai. It was, in the end, a matter of terminology. And that brings us to the current Zenos in our midst. And while sometimes these rationalizations bring about necessary and positive change, like the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, sometimes they have negative pushback, like the Soviet revolutions in Russia, China, Korea, and Cuba. So today, we have a new revolution, a new pushback, with questions both sides of our dichotomy thought were settled long ago, that go down to the more fundamental way we view the world. How many genders? How many sexualities? How many races? Nay, how many species of humans? Well, we can make the same type of arguments that Zeno did. First, let's try his approach of there is only one. Okay, one human race, for we are all Homo sapiens sapien. One sex, for we all start off as female in the womb. And we are all animal, so there is no human. Oops, I just hit my first paradox. For how can there be no human if I am one? And how can there be no me if I'm the one who's sane in reading this? But alas, let's continue this line of thinking to its end. Let's continue into absurdity. We now have to wipe out gender, sexuality, and science. But wait. Zeno would argue for the other side as well. So let's take it to the other extreme. Let's take humans. Let's say that each variation is something new. So if each gene can mutate 64 times per generation, at 20,000 genes in a human animal, meaning that there are now over 1 million possible human species, whatever that threshold for a species might be. And logically, from this argument, there are 3 sexes: male, female, and intersex. But wait, what about all the variations in between? And soon enough, it all becomes unwieldy, and the language means nothing. Now we've gone too far the other way, and to hold on to any sense of identity, each nation has to become its own race, its own people, and then suddenly we regress to biblical and then prehistoric times, where each tribe is fighting for a foothold for survival, and eradicating your enemy is the only way to guarantee safety and victory. That is not what we want. And this is where the Aristotelian in me comes out. So, from my point of view, the solution remains in the middle. A compromise in the language. A social contract with society, where we don't need absolutes to get things done. To accept that motion is real. To see things and recognize them as they are. Yes, words change. Meanings change. Laws change. And people evolve. But that doesn't mean that these things don't exist. We are imperfect. We are incomplete. We label things as male and female and accept that some people are born intersex. But we also understand that individuals who meet that criteria of intersex are rare. And we also understand more than that, that thanks to science, people can transition from one sex to another. That language is good enough. Not because those terms are precise, but because of their utility. They are true enough and easy to communicate. We accept that there are traffic laws, not because we can't go over the speed limit, but because we understand that as a society, we do not want people driving 50 miles an hour through a neighborhood where children are playing. We understand the need for simplicity. We don't add to the law all the reasons one might use to speed. They might say they had a clear road or that they had an emergency. We simply instead state the law and leave it alone to be interpreted. Unfortunately, sometimes incorrectly, by those who are subject to it and by those who enforce it. Zeno and the postmodernists are wrong, not because their complaints are invalid or unsound, but because their solution is. So, it took me a week to write this. It took me another week to do research on it. And it took me about 5 or 6 takes to get it this good. And this is about as good as I'm going to get it. Now, let me tell you my sources. So for the quotes from Zeno, I used Penguin Classics, Early Greek Philosophy, and I used the Philosophical Classics and Ancient Philosophy, 4th edition. Okay? So, this is one of my books from college, by the way. And this is one of my favorite books. Now, all thoughts, all ideas, all opinions are my own. Okay? So, you want to look beyond what I just said? Well, it's all in my head. But I wanted to share this with you. So, I want to make sure that my argument is tight. Because as someone who is looking at the same problems that the rest of the YouTube community is commenting on, I want to voice my opinion as well. But I'm coming from a Hispanic, Catholic, Taoist perspective. And because of that, and a male perspective. And because of that, and a straight perspective. So I understand that the way that I'm looking at it, a lot of atheists might disagree with, a lot of feminists might disagree with, but this is a problem. And Unlike the haters, I don't have a problem with addressing that there is a problem. I just don't like the solution. And the solution of tearing down the entire system seems like a bad idea. I'm simply looking for a way to make this argument as tight as possible. So beat it up, rough it up, show me what you got, and help me make this argument of mine as intelligent as I can make it. Peace, like and subscribe. I'm Ramon, channel is Alpha 4. Talk to you later.